So, first of all, we have a little bit of a disclaimer, being that, you know, preliminary title reports and title is all part of our underwriting department, not part of our escrow department. So this is not to be construed as legal advice. Every property is different. So, so we do have to, go case by case. Many times the escrow department is in contact with our underwriters to see how to either clear some exceptions or whatever the case might be, just case by case basis on the different exceptions that come up on preliminary title reports. And you can all see my screen, right? I just switched. Okay. Okay. All right. So
Manali, I can see it. Can you make it bigger?
Yes, let me see here. Oops. There we go. Is that better?
Better.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
better.
Good, good, good.
Okay, good. Okay. All right. So what the title insurance is and the preliminary title report, it's an offer of title insurance subject to exceptions as shown on each individual report. We will go over those items. It's not an actual title policy as of yet, but an offer of issuing title policy with subject to the exceptions that are on here. So it's the prelim is the product that we offer to insure. If there is not to be title policy issued, then we don't issue a preliminary title report. It's not just something we produce. It has to be something that is going to lead to a successful close of a transaction. And the client pays for this one time. Many times the consumer is not familiar with title insurance and how it's different than their fire insurance. And one thing that they don't understand is that there's a one-time premium when they purchase the home. It's not an annual or a monthly cost such as it is with their fire insurance. So here we go. I also wanted to let you know we do have a flyer called 73 Reasons Your Client Needs Title Insurance. So sometimes clients don't know why they have to have it, and it is a little bit hard to explain. So I have this fabulous brochure. If any of you would like it, I'd be more than happy to send you a PDF of this. And it just covers some of the things that are covered in title insurance. It's actually very helpful. Now, title insurance is a whole separate class, so I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of what's covered, but I just wanted you to know that it is available for you. So the first page of a preliminary title report is pretty self-explanatory. It's got our reference number, which is the escrow number, the title officer, our address, and so forth. So this one, not too much information. Next page here is where you're going to see the date. What the date is the plant date. It's not today's date. It's not the date of your contract. It's the date that we were able to pull from property records to come up with what the preliminary title looked like at the time of the plant, the last date that they could come up with, which is usually about 2 weeks behind. So just so you're wondering why that date is usually a little bit older than your contract or at the start of the escrow, and that would be the reason why. So we issue what's called the ALTA extended policy. That is the one that the lenders like and require. Usually if it's a lot or some other commercial property, then they don't ALTA, but the ALTA for residential is the standard. Number 3 there, title is said estate is vested in, and that would be how it's vested. So in this particular case, you can see that Betty Smith is vested as a married woman as her sole and separate property. This is really important because your listing agreement might include her deceased husband, let's say. As a title company, we don't know if that is the case, but you might know as the realtor. So if that is the case and you know, then you would just let us know so that we can get a copy of the death certificate and so that we can prepare the affidavit of death and get that properly recorded so that there's no jumping through hoops and causing any delay at the very end. So this number 3 is very, very important for you to look at and see the vesting. Usually the legal description is too long to be included in here, so they do have a separate page for legal description. And on the legal description, you'll see the APN number. Now, APN number, as you all know, selling homes in Carmel is very important, more so in Carmel than anywhere else because there's no addresses. So we do go by the APN numbers, and those are always on the legal description. And the next item on here is the taxes. So taxes is always first and foremost, and it will show your installments, your first installment, your second installment, if there's any delinquencies, and what we have to pay through the escrow. So regarding what we've covered so far, here are some key questions. Does the prelim show anyone else other than your particular seller as the vested owner? If so, then we have some items to clear. Has the seller executed a deed of some sort to a third party? Maybe it was uninsured. We would need to see and take care of that. Does it show a deed of trust the seller says is already paid? Sometimes that happens, especially if it's a second or if they don't owe any money on their, let's say, equity loan. Is the property being sold as a result of a divorce? Also important to know. Will the buyer be married prior to close? We need to know whether we're going to issue a separate grant deed or a quitclaim deed and so forth. Does the buyer want to hold title as his or her sole and separate property? They can. It's just important to know that so that we can take care of the proper vesting, but also, again, whether it's a quitclaim deed or a grant deed at the end of that. We will go on to our page here talking about supplemental taxes, if any. So there might be supplemental taxes if there's been a recent sale, or if maybe the property had a room addition, let's say, or maybe they had built a swimming pool or whatever is going to trigger a tax to the a separate property tax. So you'll see the supplemental taxes, and sometimes they haven't been paid, so they will be shown here. And what escrow does is always calls the assessor's office to make sure, because sometimes they don't always show up on the prelim. The next item on here is the CC&Rs. And they will correspond with the HOA if there is any. Now, many times they still show discriminatory practices on the CC&Rs, and those cannot be enforced, but they are on here, so we would just let the buyer know that not everything on here is going to be enforced if it's illegal, especially those discriminatory practices. The next item is an easement. This one is for utilities and incidental purposes. And so an easement can run with the land, and it can be for PG&E, it could be for access to driveways, let's say, or maybe special easements for maintenance, planting by the city, trees and so forth. They are listed here to create the awareness of them. It's always a good idea to read them through once received with your prelim and call us with any questions. They can be recorded for any types of reasons and are not covered with your title insurance, and that's why it's included as an exception. You can request the underlying document if there is one, which you would be looking for the any effects of use. So let's say that it would affect the marketability or value of the property. Those are things that you're going to want to know ahead of time for the sake of your buyer. Sorry about that. You should receive a color-coded map as well so that your client can see where the easements are located on the lot. The next item are deeds of trust. So the deeds of trust is something that corresponds to the seller's loans. Maybe he's got a first, second, sometimes even a third, and those will come off when we issue the title insurance to the buyer. So what we do is we send a demand out to the lender and get those paid off so that we can deliver clear title. There is a notice of default recorded on this particular sample prelim. And if that's the case, then we also need to clear that so that we can issue a clear title. If you're aware that your client is in bankruptcy, please let us know right away, because your seller may not have the right to sell the property without permission from the court first. So it's very important for us all to notice whether this property is in default. There's been many escrows that have been delayed due to this. Okay, and of information. So that would be this item here that you see, number 9. It's a requirement of the car contract. So if there's a lien that appears against the buyer or seller that has been filed with the courts, but not actually recorded against the property, it may or may not actually be our party. And so that's what we're looking for when we issue that form, statement of information, that everyone actually hates to fill out because it's 10 years of history of their addresses and employer and marriages and so forth. So it's a lot of information that does not go anywhere, but stays with us. We don't share that in any way, shape, or form. It's completely private. All we're looking for is to match liens either with our party or that does not belong to our party, so that we can clear those. Now, once we get the fully signed contract and the buyer's deposit, we mail a package that gets mailed to the buyer and seller for both parties to complete and return. And this will help us a great deal to have the social security numbers, or even if it's just the last 4 digits, full names of the party, current mailing addresses, and so forth, so that we can clear any liens quickly. Now, with the informational notes on the preliminary title report, you'll see tax information and sometimes lender information. You will also see what type of property you are dealing with, whether it's vacant land, residential, commercial, etc. And if they have or have not had any documents recorded to change title in any way over the past 24 months. This next page is the legal description that we were referring to earlier, and it does have the APN number also that we were referring to. The next page is the assessor's parcel map. So we want to make sure that we're talking about the correct lot, right? And so if you happen to see a discrepancy, please let us know. It sounds hard to believe that it wouldn't be correct, but believe it or not, there really actually has been examples of how this has not matched up. We do have a loose flyer of this APN map because sometimes APN numbers are hard to read, right? We're always trying to figure out, well, what lot number matches the lot, block, and book numbers at the top of the page and so forth. So if you need help with that, please let me know. On this page, you will see personal liens against the seller and must be cleared up prior to the close of escrow. So these would be considered red flags and can result in a delay of closing. So one is a mechanics lien. So mechanics liens are issued by the contractor if they've done work on a property in the last 90 days and maybe they haven't been paid yet. So that is why one of the questions on the seller's package is, have you had any work done on the home in the last 90 days? And the need to know is because we're looking for the mechanics liens. Hopefully there is not any, but if there is, we have to get those cleared before we can close escrow, because the contractor can slap it on at any time, regardless of who the owner is. So we want to make sure that those are paid. Maybe he hasn't paid his subs, so this, when we get the release from the contractor, it's stating that he does have payment to the subs, and we're not expected to receive any other liens against the particular property. A list pendants, this item here, number 2, it's a court action. And so what this means that there is a court action in process, and we cannot close until it is rectified. A release or withdrawal of action is required for it to be recorded, for it to be removed. If this property is involved in a foreclosure, and then we also need to know right away. There could be a date, or there will be a date, and we have to make sure that we close before, and have permission from the lender and so forth. The next item is effect of a deed, and this would be if there is an uninsured deed. So that means that no title insurance was issued. So sometimes that might happen if there was a transfer to from, let's say, the parents to one of their adult children, or maybe there was a transfer somehow that just took place with a paralegal or an attorney that didn't use title insurance. So that is still considered an uninsured deed. We would just need more information just to verify, and because it does create a cloud on the title that we need to have cleared, just a little bit of extra underwriting from our title department. And depending on what's on here, the escrow department will let you know what needs to be done. Next item is a lack of right of access to and from the land. So this could be that there is no access to the public street, and you would need to contact escrow to find out what needs to be done. We just actually had a situation like this happen not too long ago, just this year, actually, of a property in San Luis Obispo County, where the buyer did not have access to his property from the driveway of the neighbor. So we had to get our legal department involved, saved the client actually a lot of money in legal fees that he normally would have had to pay, but because it was an insured transaction, we covered it. So that was a great little success story. Number 6 is a statement of information, which we've covered. There could be IRS liens here. There could be child support liens. All of those liens have nothing to do with the property, but they do have something to do with the owner. And that's the reason why we list, those are the liens that will pop up when we look for what's called the GI, the general index. And that's why we need the statement of information to clear. So let's say that there's a child support lien and it was John Smith, but it belonged to junior, not senior. So those are the things that we want to clear. But the reason why they're on here is because even though it has nothing to do with the property, it has something to do with the owner. And certain entities like the IRS and like government agencies have the right to place a lien against the property, and those liens will stay with the property regardless of who the owner is. They don't go away because they transfer title. So these are all the searches that we do as a title company to make sure that we're issuing a clean slate, and so that way the buyer doesn't inherit something that we missed. It does happen actually quite a bit if there was a family transaction where maybe the parents were transferring title to one of their kids. They wanted to get them maybe a head start in the home owning world, and they transferred title, but maybe the parents didn't understand that because they're self-employed and they haven't been paying their taxes, that loan follows the ownership of the property. And now anytime junior wants to go and, let's say, refi or sell, he is going to find that his dad's liens are on his property and there's nothing he can do about them. They need to be cleared. So that has happened many times. So these are the key questions that we like to ask ourselves when we're looking in the prelim for this type of thing. Does the seller or buyer have a common name? Was the seller or buyer a party to any lawsuits? Does the seller or buyer have any state or federal tax liens? Has the seller filed bankruptcy? Is the seller or buyer subject to child support or alimony payments? Is the seller or buyer the proprietor of a dissolved business or a business in bad standing? So all of these things can affect the title and us issuing clear title to the next owner. So these are all the questions that we look at, and it's good for the agents to be aware of as well. Here are a few more. Maybe there's been recent work or improvements, any kind of construction on the property. Has the seller or contractor recorded a notice of completion? Has the seller or contractor received a certificate of final completion and occupancy? Does the buyer intend to make improvements on the property? Just some more questions there. On this page, it talks about good funds law, and when we receive the buyer's EMD or earnest money deposit, it's okay for us to accept a personal check. But when they submit their funds to close, it does need to be a cashier's check or a wire. And we do have to abide by the good funds law, which means that the funds have to have cleared prior to us transferring title. So that's why we want the funds the day before recording. Now, these are just boilerplate pages on a preliminary title report. So nothing too interesting there. We did want to also include some other red flags that are in conjunction with escrows. And some of those would be, is there a notice of default? Is the property going through a short sale? Many of you were in the industry back in '08 when there was plenty of short sales for many years, and we all know how long those took. And those are going to affect, you know, just so many aspects, and we like to know ahead of time because what we're trying to avoid is any delays in closing. So we always like to just check off a few things in the very beginning so that we're not, you know, jumping through hoops in the end. Is there a power of attorney? That's also very important. We're going to need a copy of that. Is there a trust, probate, and court orders? We're going to need copies of those documents as well. Is there withholding and exchanges? So if the property is not somebody's personal residence, they could be subject to tax withholding unless they're going to be doing a 1031 exchange. So that opens up another, you know, class on exchanges, and we love doing them. We do have a sister company called First American 1031 Exchange, and you know, that's a whole separate class that you may have already taken. And we want to know who the entities are to the transaction. Maybe it's held in partnership or corporation and so forth, in which case we would also need copies of the corporate resolution and so forth. Notice of default and short sale. These are just some more questions. Sometimes the property is being sold to avoid foreclosure. You know, is the sale a deed in lieu of foreclosure for a private beneficiary? I mean, all of these, you know, topics, you know, can complicate the escrow, and we just want to let the escrow officer know ahead of time. Case by case, they will guide you through what needs to be done, what we're going to do to clear items, and what help the agent can be, and also the owner. If there's a power of attorney, then we will need to see the original, and we will need to get it approved through our underwriting department. And we also need to make sure that if there's a trust, that it allows for power of attorney. So a lot of things we take for granted, but there's actually a lot for us to go through on the documents. And what we do is we submit them to our underwriting department. It's not your actual escrow officer that is looking through those to approve those. When there's a trust, probate, or court order, we need to know whether the seller's holding title in a trust, or does the buyer want to hold title to a trust? Is the vested owner deceased? Is the vested owner incapacitated? That does happen, to where maybe the recent power of attorney documents were just new. They were just notarized, but let's say that the vested owner is actually incapacitated, or maybe they have dementia. It opens up other items to where the escrow officer might be asking for additional documentation. It could be from doctors even. So regarding the withholding, there are several withholding amounts that might be required. For example, if the client is going to be, if they don't live in their actual residence, we could be collecting the 3 1/3% withholding. So that depends on whether the form that we receive, which is the California 593 form. It's a 4-page form that we submit to the seller. The seller can fill this form out in conjunction with their CPA if they would like, but that tells us how much we're going to be withholding if they're not going to be doing a 1031 exchange. Now, sometimes the seller might live abroad, and if that's the case, then again, we need to just plan for extra time. We need to plan for that seller to go and sign documents at the U.S. consulate and so forth. There's just a lot that can happen and go extra time. Let's see, will the seller have a loss of 0 gain on the income property? That can be too. And it's not for us as a title company to determine those things. It's up to the actual seller, and he can again contact his CPA. So these are some of the things that we look for in entities. They would need to submit a copy of the partnership agreement, corporate laws, corporate resolution, or trust agreement for approval by our underwriting department. Now, most lenders will not lend to a trust, so that is another thing for an agent to know and talk to the lender if they have the buyer's side of the transaction. Sometimes what happens is we can just put the title into the name of the buyers, and then they can transfer the title to the trust after it closes. And then usually that works okay with the lender. So we don't want to assume anything. We want to ask a lot of questions. We want to read and review the preliminary title report. The escrow officer will also be looking at it, so you're not alone, and please feel free to ask questions of them, and they will definitely let you know how to get those cleared. Most red flags will be obvious, so that'll be bankruptcies and deaths, or foreclosures, things like that will be on there. So a lot is to communicate with your client and ask questions. Communicate with your escrow officer, and just question everything. So these are our escrow officers, Natalie Nickerson at our Carmel office, Bridget Borba in our Salinas office. And I also wanted to just share with you a little bit of demographic in the area. It's just very interesting to see, what is projected to happen in the next 5 years when it comes to demographics. And the reason why we like to share these stats is just because, you know, we're in the business of selling homes, right? And we want to make everybody a buyer. So what's the buying power of the population in our area? We need to know that so that we can leverage the marketing strategies that we implement every day when, you know, we're trying to figure out, you know, what strategies we're going to be coming up with for the year or for the quarter and so forth. So it's kind of interesting here under the population portion, the population growth in the Carmel metro area, which is about 16,000 people. So they're only expecting it to grow about 330 people. The white population is expected to go down in the next 5 years. And the Black population is supposed to be increasing by about 15, the Asian population increasing about 87. So those are just kind of interesting stats. Now, out of the Asian groups, the group that is most expected to grow is the Japanese population, which is 36%, followed by the Chinese population, which is 29%. Now here we have some interesting stats on the household median income. So total household median income is 107,000. The white household median income is currently 109. And then we see the Asian household income is 103,000. And so there's a lot of buying power here of different multicultural groups. It looks like all of them can afford homes. The Hispanic household median income is 92,321. And I also thought it was very interesting here to see at the bottom the population by generation. Now, most of the time, these numbers fall in different categories, but for Carmel, I guess it's no surprise that we do have a very mature population, and we know that. So seniors, which is the population that are 76 years old and older, they are 22% of our population, but the highest is the baby boomers. And those are people that are between 66 and 74 years of age, and that amounts to about 39% of the population in our Carmel area. So just knowing these stats is just helpful to you so that you know, again, where you're putting your marketing dollars so that we know where we can be successful in, you know, obtaining these buyers and sellers. Now, in contrast, in Salinas, the millennial and the Generation Z are the highest percentage of population. So here we have our stats for Salinas, where we can see that the Caucasian population in the next 5 years is expected to decrease almost 3,000 people. The African American population is also expected to decrease, and that's about 321 people. The Asian population is expected to increase by about 208. And the Hispanic population to increase about 11,000. And then here we have their median household income. So you can see there. Now, Asian population, we break it down by groups because we know that that encompasses so many. And so for Salinas, the top Asian group is the Filipino, and they have about 6,235. As opposed to the lowest here, Korean, 824. So you can kind of see how that changes. Now, First American Title is very dedicated in serving communities and all different languages. So we do have a website, which is firstandmulticultural.com. So if you do have any buyers or sellers who prefer materials about title and escrow in their own language, please let me know. We do have brochures in 24 different languages, and this particular website translates into 6. So Chinese, Spanish, Japanese, Vietnamese, Korean, and English. And we did say that in Salinas, the Filipino was the largest Asian group. Well, we do have actually a lot of loose brochures in Tagalog to help them out. So just wanted to point this out. These are available in videos as well, but also a lot of printed material. Okay, so do we have any questions? I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to open up the chat box here. And if you have any questions, feel free to, type them in, or please unmute. This is, we can just do a little round table discussion. You don't actually have to be formal and type them in.
So, Minelli, I have a question.
Okay.
So, about bankruptcy and the preliminary title report, how long after the bankruptcy is cleared, I mean, I know you need to know it, but how long after the bankruptcy is cleared can a seller sell their home? Right away?
It's pretty immediate. If the bankruptcy court, or excuse me, did you say bankruptcy or foreclosure? I'm sorry. You said bankruptcy, is that correct?
Yes, I said bankruptcy. Sorry, I muted.
Okay, sorry about that. So yeah, it's pretty immediate. As long as we have permission from the bankruptcy court, that's a signed document by the judge. So then we can go ahead and close.
Great, thank you so much.
Absolutely, good question. Gets complicated when there's a bankruptcy. Any other questions? I know we went through a lot, and now, I believe Jamie had emailed everyone the sample brochure that was up on your screen, but if you didn't happen to get it, please let me know. I'd be more than happy to send you a PDF of that. And also, I do have many other brochures for you. I'm going to email out one called Exceptions Explained. And so it goes through individual exceptions and what we do to clear them. Really interesting flyer that I just happen to love. So I'm going to go ahead and send that all out to you as well so that you have.
Manelli, there was a question in the chat from Patrick. It says, what exactly do you mail to the buyers and sellers during the transaction?
So that happens in the very beginning stages of when the escrow is open, actually when the contract gets ratified, and we basically will email questionnaires and any forms that need to be filled out. So in the case of the seller, is this your primary residence? Have you had any work done in the last 90 days? There's just it's a questionnaire. In the case of the buyer, a lot of it has to do with the statement of identity. Who are you? We need to clear your name if it happens to be common and so forth. So, so those are the types of things that get sent out. Many consumers will send those back. A lot of times they will, ask you about them, and then many times they don't. So that's something that then we take care of in the end during the signing if there's something that we still need to know.
Can you also talk about 3 1/3 again, just to elaborate a little bit further on that?
Yes. So let's say that the seller is not going to be doing a 1031 exchange. We need to collect funds for tax purposes. And the reason why is because most likely they will have a gain, and they will have that form to fill out to calculate whether they will have a gain or not. It's not for us to figure out, but the burden is on the actual owner. And so then we will collect that 3 1/3 with escrow and then submit that to the state. And then what happens is that amount holds as sort of a placeholder for when they file their tax returns. Then they can, they already have that 3 1/3 paid, but then when they file their tax returns, they'll either get a credit back if they pay too much, or that number will get adjusted based on whatever their forms are. And I see that our sales manager, has joined us. Hi, Sal.
Hi, good morning, everyone. How are you? It's a pleasure to be here. Sorry that I'm a little bit late. I had a different time on my calendar. My apologies.
My apologies. It was me. And so Sal is our regional manager that I was letting you know about, that covers all the way from the East Bay all the way down to Monterey County. And so we're just really excited that he's part of our team now too, as of just a few months ago when Barbara Dimitrick, who many of you know, retired. And so now we have Sal, and he's just fabulous. He's been a great resource for our sales department and also for our clients for any information. So Sal, we went ahead and went through the preliminary title report presentation. I didn't go through your story, but we went through the brochure.
That's perfect. So thank you, Manelli. I appreciate that. So I hope that our goal was accomplished today, which is to make sure that you understand the purpose of title insurance and how to review a preliminary title report and look for any red flags and matters that could become issues that would challenge or delay a transaction, and how to work towards resolving those. So as Manelli said, my name is Sal Covarrubias. I'm the Bay Area sales manager, and I'm happy to be here with KW and helping Manelli down in the Monterey Salinas marketplace. So I'm happy to support you any way I can, and I'm open for any questions. If you still had questions on the preliminary title report, the process itself, how the coverage works, and maybe from the perspective from a realtor or buyer seller as to things you might be aware of to help support you through a closing.
So there is a question here in the chat, and it's from Bill. It says, is there a good way to check on the correct APN/legal description? I have had instances where the title and appraiser went back and forth on which version was correct.
Yes. So, Bill, there's several matters that can affect both of those things. So it depends on what the issue is, but I'll take them both independently if that's okay. So I'm going to start with the APN. APN issues usually come up for a number of reasons. One is the county assessor. So the APN is the assessor's parcel number. That's the number that the county assessor uses to collect property taxes against. And so they may have either an incorrect number, or they may have assigned an incorrect number through the DRE process. And so I love Manelli. I love your dog because everybody's working at home right now, so we all get that. But with the county assessor, when the DRE process happens, the developer does a lot out process, and so that includes mapping, and that includes splitting a large piece of property into individual lots. That's when the APN is assigned. Sometimes when that APN is initially assigned, there may have been an error during that mapping process. So that's number one. That could be an issue. Number two, that could be an issue is if there's, and this is the most common issue, and that is two parcels that are side by side that are owned by the same person, but have two different APNs. So sometimes when you call us and you say, hey, I'm selling 123 Main Street, we use that USPS mailing address to start the escrow process and to pull a preliminary title report. What we may not be aware of is that this may be a double lot. So there may be one or more structures on it and it's two lots, but we're only transferring title on one. So sometimes that happens as well, and we're not made aware of that until after the review of the plat map and somebody says, hey, wait a minute, there's actually two parcels here that are being transferred. But to get to the root of your question, the only way to find out exactly is to have a survey done. Typically, we don't need to go that far, right, for an APN dispute or issue. We can simply go back to the county assessors and say, here's the dispute. The number we have on file is this. The number you have on file is that. And usually through research, we're able to find out exactly what that is. So we have to just go to the county. The second issue is the legal description, Bill. So I'm glad you brought that up, because the legal description is really important, and it's kind of the same thing. What's similar to the APN. We ensure meets and bounds. So if there's an issue, for example, of an encroachment or something of that matter, it's going to be based on what the meets and bounds are for the title coverage. And the legal description describes where the end and starting points are for that particular property. Oftentimes, legal description is incorrect because, again, there's errors made during the lot out process with the DRE during new construction, or an incorrect legal is attached by a title company at some point during the process when we're insuring, and that sticks with the property as it goes on to be transferred and insured multiple times. So again, the process there is working with the county to ensure that we have the correct legal description. Sometimes when the legal description is incorrect, it needs to be recorded, or excuse me, it needs to be corrected. And when that's the case, we will usually get a survey to correct the legal description and record a correct legal description on top of or in front of any matters that were errors in the past. So that's why I think, in the electronic version of the How to Read a Prelim or Sample Preliminary Title Report that Manelli has, there is a portion there that has a plat map. And it tells you how to read that, and it's kind of an important thing to make sure you're reviewing to ensure that it matches to the legal description and that you're transferring title on the correct property. I hope that answers your question, Bill.
Yeah, I think what I had seen was it almost looked like typographical errors or just minor differences in the legal description. So I was just sort of wondering who's like the ultimate arbiter on that. I guess the trick is to catch it in the beginning and call it out to title and then let them fight it out.
Yeah, well, we'll let us correct it with the county, right? So it is ultimately going to be the county. And to your point, Bill, when you mentioned typographical errors or small things like that. So in the past, when we were abstracting or taking copies of county records and transferring them to our records, right? Because we don't use county records per se to run a preliminary title report. It's just too risky for us because there's enough errors there that we're not willing to accept that risk. So we maintain our own title plant. So when we, in the olden days, when we maintained our old title plat, a lot of that stuff was copied and transposed manually. So there were errors that were made there. So to your point, Bill, those issues were probably issues that were created years ago during the abstracting process. Nowadays, everything is digital and OCR. So whatever the county has is almost always what we have in our records. But if a property hasn't transferred in 10, 15, 20 years, it's possible that there's an error in we have to correct. Questions or concerns?
Well, we didn't go over solar. That might be something I had wanted to go over solar and forgot to include that. So maybe you'd like to talk to us about that.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things with solar. So I'll lump in solar, and I'll also talk about PACE and HERO loans. So if you guys, for example, are you guys familiar about HERO and PACE loans? So those are loans that homeowners use to make energy efficiency upgrades to their properties. So that's by either going to take out an existing lawn to save water, or put in solar, or change out the water heater, right, to a tankless water heater, things of that nature, right, to help save energy. So with those HERO and PACE loans, they are not paid like a traditional loan where you make a monthly payment for principal and interest. You pay twice a year and it's attached to your property tax, okay? And so it's 2 payments a year paid through property tax. So that lien to your property through property tax, we will put on your preliminary title report, and it will be up at the top with taxes. So you have to make sure that you're looking at that. The other piece with the solar is there are two ways to kind of take solar. One is to buy it. The other way is to lease it. So if you're leasing solar and that lien on your property is that you're leasing it, then that can delay a transaction if we don't, address that lien early on. And so our goal, what we do is we move that, we reach out to that lien holder, ask them to transfer that lien from you as the current owner to the new homeowner. And so the solar companies work with us in the escrow process to transfer that lien over from one owner to the other as part of the transfer. But that does take additional time. It can take several weeks to a month. So that's something you want to get ahead of during the escrow process early on. Hopefully even start it before the property goes onto the market if possible. The second thing is that if the property, if the solar is owned and there's still money due on the work that was done there may be a loan for that, then that's obviously, and there's a lien associated to the property, that's obviously we're going to need to clear up before we transfer title through the curative process. So there's a lot of moving parts with solar, but what you're going to want to address first is this owned solar or is this leased solar? And once you have the answer to that question, you'll know how to attack it in the escrow process.